It was just another ordinary evening in the small, quiet neighborhood of Oak Ridge. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple before fading into darkness. Lisa Monroe, a 32-year-old woman with warm, brown skin and a calm demeanor, pulled her car into the driveway of her modest home. She lived alone in this suburban area where most houses looked alike. White picket fences, neatly trimmed lawns, and families who rarely caused any trouble. Lisa wasn't like the other residents of Oak Ridge, though no one knew it. To her neighbors, she was simply the polite young woman who always greeted them with a smile when they crossed paths. What they didn't know was that Lisa worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. Her job was dangerous, secretive, and far removed from the peaceful life she pretended to lead. For years, she had been undercover, gathering information on criminal organizations operating within the country. It was a role that required her to blend in seamlessly, which she did exceptionally well. That night, after finishing a long shift at a local cafe, a cover job she maintained as part of her disguise, Lisa decided to stop by the grocery store. She picked up essentials: bread, milk, and a few snacks. Balancing the heavy paper bag in one arm, she stepped out of her car, keys jingling softly in her free hand. As she walked toward her front door, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. Finally, she could unwind and relax. But her moment of peace was shattered seconds later. Bright red and blue lights flashed behind her, illuminating the entire street. Startled, Lisa turned around to see a police cruiser pulling up aggressively, its tires screeching against the pavement. Before she could process what was happening, a loud voice boomed through a megaphone. "Stop right there, put your hands up." Lisa froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced around, confused. Why was a cop yelling at her? Had something happened nearby? Slowly, she set the grocery bag down on the ground and raised her hands above her head, palms open. She didn't want to make any sudden moves that might escalate the situation. Out of the cruiser stepped Officer Greg Hawkins, a middle-aged man with a stern expression and an imposing build. He wore his uniform proudly, but his reputation in the community was far from spotless. Over the years, several complaints had been filed against him for using excessive force and making racially charged comments during routine stops. However, none of those allegations had stuck, allowing him to continue patrolling the streets of Oak Ridge without consequence. Hawkins approached Lisa with quick, deliberate strides, his hand resting on the grip of his holstered gun. His eyes scanned her, suspiciously, taking in her appearance. "Who are you?" he barked, his tone sharp and accusatory. "What are you doing here?" Lisa swallowed hard, trying to stay calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I live here," she replied evenly, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling beneath the surface. "This is my house." Hawkins narrowed his eyes, clearly unconvinced. "Do you have ID?" he demanded, ignoring her explanation entirely. "Yes, but," Lisa began, only to be cut off abruptly. "No excuses," Hawkins snapped. "Stay still, or I'll assume you're resisting arrest." His words carried a threat, and Lisa understood immediately that arguing would only make things worse. She nodded silently, keeping her hands raised. As Hawkins circled her slowly, his gaze lingered on her face, then swept over her clothes, a plain sweater and jeans. Nothing about her appearance suggested criminal activity. Still, he seemed determined to find fault. "You don't look like you belong here," he muttered under his breath, though Lisa heard him clearly. The comment stung, but she bit her tongue. Arguing with an armed officer wasn't wise, especially not in a situation like this. Instead, she focused on controlling her breathing, reminding herself that she hadn't done anything wrong. Surely this misunderstanding would resolve itself soon. Unbeknownst to both Lisa and Hawkins, their confrontation was drawing attention. Neighbors peered out of their windows, curious about the commotion. Some even stepped outside onto their porches, whispering among themselves. One elderly woman grabbed her phone and started recording the scene, capturing every tense moment on video. Little did anyone know, this seemingly random traffic stop would spiral into something much bigger. and exposed deep-seated issues lurking beneath the surface of their idyllic neighborhood. For now, however, all eyes were on Lisa and the officer, standing mere feet away from her, his hand dangerously close to his weapon. Neither of them realized how drastically their lives were about to change, or that secrets hidden in plain sight would soon come to light. Officer Greg Hawkins stood just a few feet away from Lisa, his jaw clenched tightly as if he were ready for a fight. His eyes darted between her face and the house behind her, searching for something, anything, that might justify his aggressive behavior. But there was nothing suspicious about Lisa or her surroundings. She wasn't holding anything dangerous, nor did she appear to be hiding anything. Still, Hawkins refused to back down. Lisa tried again to explain herself calmly. "Officer," she said, her voice firm but respectful, "I told you I live here, this is my home." She gestured toward the modest house behind her, its porch light glowing softly in the evening darkness. "If you'd like, I can show you my ID." Hawkins ignored her offer. Instead, he took another step closer, his hand now resting firmly on the grip of his holstered gun. "Don't move," he growled, his tone dripping with hostility. It was clear that he had already made up his mind about her before even hearing her side of the story. To him, Lisa didn't fit the image of someone who belonged in this neighborhood, an unspoken bias that fueled his actions. The tension grew thicker with each passing second. Neighbors continued to watch from their windows and porches, some shaking their heads in disbelief while others whispered nervously among themselves. Among them was Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman who lived 2 doors down from Lisa. She had known Lisa for years, having exchanged pleasantries whenever they crossed paths. Seeing the officer point his flashlight directly at Lisa's face, Mrs. Thompson couldn't stay silent any longer. "Officer," Mrs. Thompson called out, stepping forward cautiously. Her voice trembled slightly, but her words carried conviction. "That's Lisa Monroe. She lives here. I see her all the time." For a brief moment it seemed like Hawkins might listen. He glanced at Mrs. Thompson, his expression unreadable. Then, without missing a beat, he snapped back, "Ma'am, stay out of this unless you want trouble too." His dismissive tone sent a chill through the crowd. Mrs. Thompson hesitated, unsure whether to press further or retreat. In the end, she chose the latter, stepping back reluctantly but keeping her eyes glued to the unfolding scene. Lisa locked eyes with Mrs. Thompson briefly, silently pleading for help. Though her neighbor couldn't intervene directly, her presence gave Lisa a sliver of hope. Maybe someone else would speak up. Maybe someone else would realize how wrong this situation felt. But for now, Lisa was on her own. Back at CIA headquarters, miles away from Oak Ridge, Agent Carter stared at his phone screen in frustration. He had been trying to reach Lisa for the past 10 minutes, but all his calls went unanswered. This wasn't unusual. Lisa often worked under strict protocols that required her to remain off-grid. But tonight, something felt different. A gut feeling told him that something was very wrong. Carter decided to act. Using the GPS tracking embedded in Lisa's phone, a standard precaution for agents working undercover, he traced her location. When the coordinates led him to a residential neighborhood, his concern deepened. Why was Lisa stationary in such a random spot? And why hadn't she answered her phone? Without wasting another second, Carter alerted his superiors and assembled a small team to accompany him to Oak Ridge. As they sped toward the scene in unmarked vehicles, Carter couldn't shake the unease growing in the pit of his stomach. Whatever awaited them, he knew one thing for certain: they needed to get there fast. Meanwhile, back on the street, Hawkins's aggression reached new heights. Frustrated by what he perceived as Lisa's lack of cooperation, he drew his weapon and pointed it directly at her chest. The metallic click of the safety being released echoed loudly in the otherwise quiet evening air. Gasps rippled through the crowd of neighbors, many of whom instinctively pulled out their phones to record the incident. Lisa's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain still. Panic wouldn't help her now. She needed to think clearly. "Sir," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins, "please lower your weapon. I haven't done anything wrong." But Hawkins wasn't listening. His gaze hardened and he sneered. You people always have excuses, don't you? The derogatory remark hit Lisa like a punch to the gut. She had heard similar comments before. Racist, remarks disguised as jokes or insults hurled during tense encounters. But never had she expected to face such blatant prejudice in her own neighborhood. For a split second, anger flared inside her, but she quickly pushed it aside. Losing her temper wouldn't diffuse the situation. It would only make things worse. As the standoff dragged on, Lisa's phone buzzed incessantly in her pocket. Each vibration reminded her of Carter's attempts to contact her, but reaching for it would likely provoke Hawkins even more. She could only hope that her colleagues realized something was amiss and acted quickly. Time seemed to slow down as Lisa weighed her options. Should she try reasoning with Hawkins again? Or should she wait quietly, hoping that backup arrived soon? Every instinct screamed at her to defend herself, but she knew better than to challenge an armed officer alone. So she stood there, hands raised, heart pounding, praying that this nightmare would end without violence. In the distance, faint sounds of approaching sirens began to pierce the night air. At first, no one noticed. They were too focused on the drama unfolding in front of them. But as the noise grew louder, heads turned toward the road leading into the neighborhood. Two unmarked cars screeched to a halt near the scene, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Out stepped four figures dressed in tactical gear, their movements swift and purposeful. One of them stepped forward, flashing a badge at Hawkins. "Stand down, officer," the man commanded, his voice authoritative and commanding. "That woman is under our protection." Hawkins froze, his face paling visibly as realization dawned. The crowd of neighbors gasped audibly, murmuring among themselves. Who were these people, and why were they defending Lisa? Lisa finally lowered her hands, exhaling deeply. For the first time since the ordeal began, she allowed herself a flicker of relief. But the battle wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. The arrival of the unmarked cars and the mysterious figures in tactical gear sent shockwaves through the tense scene. Officer Greg Hawkins, who moments earlier had been the one holding all the power, suddenly looked like a deer caught in headlights. His gun, still pointed at Lisa, wavered slightly as he turned his attention to the newcomers. His face flushed red with embarrassment, though it was unclear whether it stemmed from shame or anger. One of the men stepped forward confidently, his badge gleaming under the streetlights. He introduced himself firmly, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Agent Carter," he said, addressing Hawkins directly. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. That woman you're threatening is Special Agent Lisa Monroe, an undercover operative working on behalf of the Central Intelligence Agency." Hawkins's jaw dropped, his grip on the gun loosening further. For a moment, he seemed unable to process what he was hearing. "What?" he stammered, glancing back and forth between Lisa and the agents. She's CIA?" "That's correct," Agent Carter replied, his tone icy. "And unless you want to explain to your superiors why you pulled a weapon on a federal agent, I suggest you holster that firearm immediately." Hawkins hesitated, clearly torn between defiance and submission. But the weight of the situation finally sank in. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered his weapon and stepped back, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The crowd of neighbors who had been watching silently erupted into murmurs. Some whispered in disbelief, while others exchanged knowing looks. This wasn't just a routine traffic stop gone wrong. It was something far bigger. Lisa, still standing, with her hands raised, finally allowed herself to relax. She exhaled deeply, her body trembling slightly from the adrenaline rush. Though she had faced dangerous situations before in her line of work, this encounter felt different. It wasn't the threat of physical harm that scared her. It was the blatant prejudice and hostility she had endured simply because of the color of her skin. Taking a step forward, Lisa reached into her pocket and pulled out her concealed badge. She held it up for everyone to see, including Hawkins. "I'm Special Agent Lisa Monroe," she announced loudly, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. "And you've made a serious mistake tonight." Her words hung heavy in the air. Hawkins opened his mouth as if to respond, but no sound came out. Instead, he muttered under his breath almost to himself, "How was I supposed to know?" The comment ignited a fresh wave of outrage among the onlookers. Mrs. Thompson, who had retreated earlier after being dismissed by Hawkins, now stepped forward again, her frail frame trembling with indignation. "You didn't even give her a chance," she exclaimed, pointing a finger at Hawkins. "Instead of listening to her or to me, you jumped straight to accusations. That's not how decent people behave." Other neighbors nodded in agreement, their expressions ranging from disgust to pity. One man shouted, "This isn't the first time we've seen you act like this, Hawkins. You've got a problem and it needs fixing." Hawkins flinched visibly at the criticism but said nothing. His pride had taken a beating, and he knew there was no way to salvage the situation. Behind him, the flashing lights of his patrol car seemed almost mocking now, casting eerie shadows across the pavement. Agent Carter wasted no time taking control of the scene. After ensuring that Hawkins holstered his weapon completely, he signaled for two of his team members to escort the officer away from Lisa. They led him to the side of the road, where they began questioning him about the events leading up to the confrontation. Meanwhile, Carter approached Lisa, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice filled with concern. "Did he hurt you?" Lisa shook her head, though her eyes betrayed the emotional toll the incident had taken. "I'm fine," she replied. "But this shouldn't have happened. Not here. Not like this." Carter nodded grimly. "I know," he said. "We'll handle it. Trust me, this isn't going to slide." As the agents worked to secure the area, news of the confrontation spread quickly. Neighbors who hadn't witnessed the scene firsthand gathered around, eager to learn what had transpired. Someone uploaded footage of the incident to social media, and within minutes, the story went viral. Comments poured in from across the country, with many condemning Hawkins's actions and praising Lisa's composure under pressure. Back at the scene, Lisa found herself surrounded by well-meaning neighbors offering apologies and support. Mrs. Thompson hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," she whispered. "You deserve better than this." Lisa managed a small smile, touched by the kindness. "Thank you," she said simply. "It means a lot." Despite the warmth of the moment, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. She knew how these stories usually played out. Initial outrage followed by excuses, denials, and eventually, silence. Would justice truly be served this time? Or would Hawkins walk away unscathed, just as he had after previous complaints against him? Agent Carter seemed determined to ensure the latter wouldn't happen. As he conferred with his team, Lisa overheard snippets of their conversation. "Internal Affairs will need to investigate," one agent said, "and we should alert the Department of Justice. This isn't just misconduct, it's a civil rights violation." Lisa nodded silently, grateful for the support but wary of the road ahead. She had spent years fighting injustice in her role as a CIA agent, but this fight felt deeply personal. It wasn't just about accountability, it was about proving that her life mattered, both as a professional and as a human being. As the night wore on, the crowd began to disperse, leaving Lisa alone with her thoughts. The grocery bag she had dropped earlier lay forgotten on the ground, its contents spilled across the driveway. A loaf of bread, a carton of milk, and a few snacks were scattered among shards of broken glass, a stark reminder of how quickly her evening had spiraled, out of control. Lisa bent down to pick up the items, her movements slow and deliberate. Each piece she collected felt like a symbol of the fragments of her dignity that had been shattered, and now needed to be pieced back together. As she stood up, brushing dirt off her hands, she glanced toward Hawkins, who sat slumped in his patrol car, staring blankly ahead. There was no triumph in her heart, only a deep sense of resolve. Whatever happened next, Lisa knew she wouldn't back down. This wasn't just her fight anymore, it was everyone's, and she intended to see it through until the very end. The morning after the incident, Oak Ridge woke up to a storm. News outlets across the country had picked up the story, fueled by videos recorded by neighbors and shared widely on social media. Headlines screamed phrases like, "Racist cop points," "Gun at CIA agent," and "Undercover operative mistaken for criminal." The footage showed Officer Greg Hawkins aggressively confronting Lisa Monroe, his weapon drawn, while she stood calmly with her hands raised. It was impossible to ignore the stark contrast between their demeanors, one filled with hostility, the other with quiet resilience. By sunrise, the video had millions of views online, sparking outrage and debate. Comment sections were flooded with reactions. Some praised Lisa's composure and condemned Hawkins's behavior, calling for immediate accountability. Others defended Hawkins, arguing that he was simply doing his job and couldn't have known Lisa was a federal agent. But the majority agreed on one thing. This wasn't just about one bad cop. It was symptomatic of a larger issue plaguing law enforcement in America. Lisa didn't wake up feeling victorious. Instead, she felt drained. Her phone buzzed nonstop throughout the night, lighting up with notifications from friends, colleagues, and even strangers who wanted to express their support or ask for interviews. She ignored most of them, choosing instead to sit quietly in her living room, staring out the window at the now famous driveway where everything had unfolded. The spilled groceries had been cleaned up, but the memory of the confrontation lingered like an open wound. Agent Carter arrived early that morning, bringing coffee and updates. He sat across from Lisa, his expression serious but kind. "You handled yourself well last night," he said, handing her a steaming cup. "But I need you to brace yourself. This is going to get messy." Lisa nodded, sipping the coffee slowly. "I know," she replied softly. "What happens next?" Carter sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Internal Affairs is launching an investigation into Hawkins. They'll review his past conduct, including previous complaints filed against him. Meanwhile, we've alerted higher authorities, including the Department of Justice. This isn't just a local matter anymore. It's national news." Lisa listened silently, absorbing the weight of what he was saying. While she appreciated the efforts being made to hold Hawkins accountable, she couldn't help but feel uneasy. Investigations took time, and justice was never guaranteed. Too often, cases like hers ended with empty promises and no real change. If reading her mind, Carter added, "We're not letting this slide, not this time. You deserve answers, and so does the public." Outside, reporters began gathering near Lisa's house, setting up cameras and microphones. Local news vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointing skyward. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, some curious, others annoyed by the sudden influx of media attention. Mrs. Thompson, ever supportive, approached Lisa later that afternoon, offering to act as a buffer between her and the press. "They won't leave you alone unless you give them something," Mrs. Thompson advised gently. "Maybe it's time to tell your side of the story." Lisa hesitated. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight. Her job required secrecy, not publicity. But deep down, she knew Mrs. Thompson was right. If she stayed silent, the narrative would be shaped by others, people who might twist the facts or downplay the gravity of what had happened. Reluctantly, she agreed to speak at a press conference arranged by the CIA. The event was held 2 days later in a nearby community center. Dozens of journalists packed the room, their cameras flashing as Lisa walked onto the stage accompanied by Agent Carter and several high-ranking officials. Dressed in a simple blouse and slacks, Lisa looked calm but determined. As she stepped up to the podium, the room fell silent. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside her. "My name is Lisa Monroe, and I am an undercover operative with the Central Intelligence Agency. What happened to me 2 nights ago was unacceptable, not only because of who I am professionally, but because of how I was treated as a human being." Her words struck a chord. The audience listened intently as she recounted the events of that night, describing how Hawkins had singled her out based on racial bias and refused to listen to reason. Her tone remained composed, but there was no mistaking the emotion behind her words. When she finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. During the Q&A session that followed, Reporters fired questions at her, ranging from inquiries about her work with the CIA to broader discussions about systemic racism in policing. Lisa answered each question thoughtfully, using her platform to highlight the need for reform. "This isn't just about me," she emphasized. "It's about every person who has been profiled, harassed, or worse because of the color of their skin. We can't move forward until we address these issues head-on." Her bravery inspired others to come forward. Over the next few days, more residents of Oak Ridge shared stories of similar encounters with Hawkins. One woman recounted how he had stopped her for no apparent reason during a late-night jog, accusing her of loitering suspiciously. A teenage boy described being frisked outside a convenience store despite having done nothing wrong. Each account added fuel to the growing demand for accountability. Meanwhile, Hawkins found himself under intense scrutiny. Internal affairs investigators combed through his record, uncovering multiple instances of misconduct. Complaints from years past resurfaced, painting a disturbing picture of a pattern of discriminatory behavior. Former colleagues spoke anonymously to reporters, revealing that Hawkins had often boasted about targeting individuals based on race. His arrogance, once tolerated, now seemed indefensible. Public pressure mounted rapidly. Protesters gathered outside the police station, holding signs that read, "Justice for Lisa" and "No more racist cops." Social media campaigns amplified their voices, drawing attention to the case from coast to coast. Even politicians weighed in, calling for transparency and swift action. In response, the police department issued a statement announcing Hawkins's suspension pending the outcome of the investigation. It was a small victory, but many felt it wasn't enough. Calls for his termination grew louder, echoing through town halls and online forums alike. Lisa watched all of this unfold from afar, trying to stay focused on her mission rather than the chaos surrounding her. Despite the whirlwind of attention, she remained grounded, finding solace in the support of her neighbors and colleagues. Mrs. Thompson continued to champion her cause, organizing community meetings to discuss racial profiling and police reform. Slowly but surely, the people of Oak Ridge began to unite, not just in anger but in hope for a better future. For Lisa, the experience had been both harrowing and transformative. Though she longed for the anonymity she once cherished, she recognized the importance of standing up for what was right. As the days turned into weeks, she vowed to keep fighting, not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved to live without fear of prejudice or injustice. And though the road ahead promised challenges, Lisa faced it with unwavering determination. She knew the battle was far from over, but she also knew she wasn't alone. As the weeks passed, the story of Lisa Monroe and Officer Greg Hawkins continued to dominate headlines. What started as a tense confrontation in a quiet suburban neighborhood had grown into a national conversation about racism, accountability, and police reform. The pressure on law enforcement agencies to act swiftly and decisively was immense, and officials knew they couldn't afford to ignore public outcry this time. The internal affairs investigation into Hawkins's conduct moved quickly. Spurred by mounting evidence and widespread media coverage, investigators pored over years' worth of records, including body cam footage from previous incidents, witness statements, and documented complaints filed against him. What they uncovered painted a damning picture. Hawkins had a long history of racially motivated behavior, stopping black drivers disproportionately during traffic checks, using derogatory language in reports, and dismissing legitimate grievances from community members. Yet none of these red flags had ever led to meaningful consequences for him. One particularly troubling case involved a young black man named Marcus Johnson, who had been pulled over by Hawkins 3 years earlier. According to Johnson's testimony, Hawkins accused him of stealing his own car simply because it was a luxury vehicle. Despite providing proof of ownership, Johnson was detained for hours and subjected to invasive questioning. Though Johnson later filed a formal complaint, the matter was dismissed without further investigation. Now, with renewed attention on Hawkins's actions, Johnson came forward again, sharing his experience publicly and urging others to do the same. Lisa followed these developments closely, her heart heavy but resolute. She attended town hall meetings, organized by Mrs. Thompson and other concerned citizens, where residents spoke openly about their encounters with biased policing. At one meeting, an elderly Latina woman recounted how Hawkins had once searched her home without probable cause after she reported a burglary. Another attendee, a teenage boy, described being handcuffed and questioned outside a park while playing basketball with friends. Each story added another layer to the growing portrait of systemic injustice. These accounts didn't just galvanize the community, they also caught the attention of advocacy groups and civil rights organizations. Leaders from across the country traveled to Oak Ridge to lend their voices to the movement. Prominent figures like Reverend James Calloway, a well-known activist, delivered impassioned speeches calling for sweeping reforms within law enforcement. "This isn't just about one bad apple," he declared at a rally attended by hundreds. "It's about addressing the rot at the core of our institutions. We must demand better, not just for Lisa, but for every person who has suffered under the weight of prejudice." The momentum built steadily, culminating in a massive protest march through downtown Oak Ridge. Thousands of people joined the demonstration, carrying banners and chanting slogans like, "Enough is enough" and "Hold them accountable." Among them were local high school students, teachers, business owners, and even some retired police officers who believed change was long overdue. Lisa marched alongside her neighbors, feeling both proud and humbled by the unity displayed around her. Behind the scenes, legal proceedings against Hawkins gained traction. With overwhelming evidence pointing to misconduct, prosecutors filed criminal charges against him, including counts of racial profiling, unlawful detainment, and brandishing a firearm without justification. The decision sent shockwaves through the police department, where many officers began reevaluating their own practices. Some expressed relief that Hawkins would finally face consequences, while others grumbled about unfair scrutiny. Regardless of personal opinions, however, everyone understood that things were changing, and fast. For Hawkins himself, life became increasingly unbearable. Once seen as a tough but effective enforcer, he now faced universal condemnation. His suspension turned into termination when the police chief announced that Hawkins would no longer serve in any capacity. Stripped of his badge and gun, Hawkins retreated from public view, issuing a brief apology through his lawyer that many deemed insincere. "He regrets if anyone felt targeted or disrespected," the statement read. But for those who had endured his mistreatment firsthand, such words rang hollow. In contrast, Lisa emerged as a symbol of resilience and courage. Her willingness to share her story inspired countless individuals to speak out against discrimination and advocate for change. Local schools invited her to give talks about perseverance and standing up for justice. Community leaders credited her with sparking a wave of activism that extended beyond Oak Ridge, influencing neighboring towns and cities to examine their own policies regarding policing and equality. Despite the accolades, Lisa remained grounded. She declined offers for book deals and movie adaptations of her experience, explaining that her focus was on creating tangible improvements rather than personal gain. Instead, she collaborated with lawmakers and activists to draft legislation aimed at increasing transparency and accountability within law enforcement. One proposed bill required all officers to undergo mandatory bias training and wear body cameras at all times. Another established an independent oversight board, tasked with reviewing complaints against police officers. While progress felt slow at times, Lisa reminded herself that lasting change took effort and patience. She found strength in the support of her colleagues at the CIA, who rallied around her during what had been a challenging period professionally. Even Agent Carter, typically stoic and reserved, admitted that Lisa's bravery had inspired him to reflect on his own role in promoting fairness and equity. Back in Oak Ridge, the neighborhood began to transform in subtle yet significant ways. Residents formed committees to address issues like racial profiling, affordable housing, and access to education. Mrs. Thompson spearheaded a mentorship program connecting teenagers with local leaders, fostering dialogue and understanding across generations. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves now greeted each other warmly, united by a shared commitment to building a safer, more inclusive community. Though scars from that fateful night remained, They served as reminders of how far everyone had come and how much work still lay ahead. For Lisa, the journey was bittersweet. She had never sought fame or recognition, but she recognized the power of her voice in driving positive change. As she stood on her porch one evening, watching children play in the street and hearing laughter echo through the air, she allowed herself a small smile. Change wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't perfect. But in moments like these, Lisa could see glimpses of hope, a brighter future shaped by collective action and unwavering determination. And though challenges undoubtedly awaited, she knew the people of Oak Ridge were ready to face them together. The months following the incident brought a mix of triumphs and lingering challenges for Lisa Monroe. While justice had been served in some ways, Officer Greg Hawkins was convicted on multiple charges, including racial profiling and unlawful use of force. The scars left behind by that night weren't so easily erased. For Lisa, life in Oak Ridge had changed forever. She no longer blended into the background as she once did. Instead, she became a household name, not just locally, but nationally. Her courage in standing up to systemic injustice made her a beacon of hope for many, but it also meant sacrificing the quiet anonymity she had cherished. Hawkins's trial drew widespread attention, with journalists and activists flocking to the courthouse each day. During the proceedings, testimonies from victims of his past misconduct painted a damning picture of a man who abused his authority repeatedly without consequence. When the verdict was finally announced, guilty on all counts, a collective sigh of relief rippled through the community. Hawkins received a sentence that included prison time, fines, and a lifetime ban from working in law enforcement. It was a rare outcome, one that sent a clear message. Accountability was possible even within deeply entrenched systems. For Lisa, however, the victory felt bittersweet. Yes, Hawkins had been held responsible for his actions, but the damage he caused couldn't be undone. The fear and humiliation she experienced that night stayed with her, lingering like an echo. And while she appreciated the support she received, from neighbors and strangers alike, she often wondered if people truly understood the emotional toll such incidents took. Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty, she told Agent Carter during one of their debriefings. It's about healing the wounds they leave behind. Despite the weight of everything she'd endured, Lisa refused to let bitterness consume her. Instead, she channeled her energy into advocacy work, determined to ensure that her experience wasn't wasted. She partnered with civil rights organizations to push for legislative reforms at both state and national levels. One of her proudest achievements was helping pass a bill requiring mandatory bias training for all police officers, along with stricter oversight measures to prevent future abuses of power. The legislation was named after her, the Lisa Monroe Act, a tribute she humbly accepted but never sought. Her efforts didn't stop there. Lisa became a mentor to young activists, particularly those from marginalized communities, teaching them how to navigate the complexities of fighting for justice in a world resistant to change. She spoke at schools, universities, and conferences, sharing her story not as a tale of victimhood, but as a testament to resilience and determination. "I don't want anyone else to go through what I went through," she often said during these talks. "But I also know we can't wait for someone else to fix things for us. Change starts with us, with ordinary people deciding they won't stay silent anymore." Back in Oak Ridge, the community continued to evolve. Inspired by Lisa's example, residents worked tirelessly to create a more inclusive environment. Mrs. Thompson's mentorship program flourished, connecting teenagers with mentors who encouraged them to pursue education and leadership opportunities. Local businesses implemented diversity initiatives, hiring practices, and outreach programs aimed at bridging gaps between different groups. Even the police department underwent significant restructuring, with new leadership committed to fostering trust and transparency. One of the most visible changes came in the form of a mural painted on the side of a building near Lisa's home. Created by local artists, the vibrant artwork depicted Lisa standing tall amidst a crowd of diverse faces, symbolizing unity and strength. Beneath the image were the words, "Together we rise." Every time Lisa passed by, she felt a swell of gratitude, not just for the recognition, but for the reminder that real progress required collective effort. Still, Lisa knew the battle wasn't over. Racism and prejudice didn't vanish overnight, and there were days when setbacks tested her resolve. Some critics dismissed her activism as performative, accusing her of exploiting her fame for personal gain. Others argued that focusing on individual cases like hers detracted from addressing broader systemic issues. Lisa listened to these criticisms thoughtfully, acknowledging that no solution was perfect. But she also reminded herself, and anyone willing to listen, that every step forward mattered, no matter how small. Amidst the chaos, Lisa found solace in the little things. She reconnected with old hobbies, spending hours in her garden planting flowers and vegetables. On weekends, she hosted small gatherings for close friends and neighbors, cooking meals and enjoying laughter-filled evenings. These moments helped ground her, reminding her that life wasn't defined solely by struggles or victories. It was about finding joy even in the midst of adversity. Agent Carter remained a steadfast ally throughout this period, checking in regularly to offer guidance and support. He admired Lisa's ability to balance her dual roles, as a CIA operative and as a public figure advocating for reform. "You've done something extraordinary," he told her one evening over coffee. "Most people would crumble under this kind of pressure, but you've turned it into fuel for good." Lisa smiled softly, appreciating the compliment but knowing she hadn't done it alone. "It takes a village," she replied simply. "I couldn't have gotten here without everyone who stood beside me." As the years passed, Lisa's influence only grew. Her advocacy inspired similar movements in other cities, proving that grassroots efforts could lead to meaningful change. Schools began incorporating lessons about racial equity into their curriculums, and corporations adopted policies aimed at promoting diversity and inclusion. Though progress was slow and uneven, the seeds Lisa planted continued to take root, spreading far beyond what she had initially imagined. On the 5th anniversary of the incident, Oak Ridge held a special ceremony to honor Lisa's contributions. Hundreds of people gathered in the park where the mural stood, listening to speeches and performances celebrating unity and resilience. Lisa addressed the crowd briefly, her voice filled with emotion. "5 years ago, I stood in my driveway scared and unsure of what would happen next," she said. "Tonight I stand here surrounded by love, hope, and determination. That gives me faith, not just in myself, but in all of us." When the event ended, Lisa lingered behind, gazing at the mural bathed in moonlight. She thought about how far she and the community had come since that fateful night. There was still work to be done, challenges to overcome, and battles to fight. But for now, she allowed herself to feel proud of what they had achieved together. Lisa Monroe may have started as an ordinary woman living in a quiet neighborhood, but her courage transformed her into something extraordinary, a catalyst for change. And though she knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, she faced it with unwavering resolve. After all, she had learned firsthand that even in the darkest moments, light could emerge, if you were brave enough to seek it.